Hi, this is Dan from Tornado Talk. Please take a moment to go to our website, tornadotalk.com, and click Support the Show on the menu. As you know, we offer this podcast free, but it is not free to produce. We accrue monthly costs, including writing, researching, recording, editing, and producing. Now, if you click the Donate button on that page, you can help us underwrite the cause. That's tornadotalk.com. Click Support the Show on the menu, and then you'll see the Donate button. And thank you in advance.
This is Tornado Talk, a podcast about one of nature's most fascinating phenomenon. Share your tornado story with us by email, Jen and Dan at tornadotalk.com.
That's Jen and Dan at tornadotalk.com.
Now, meteorologists Jennifer Naramore and Dan Holliday. Tornado Talk is on.
You might say that 1953 was a simpler time.
There's nothing like a Coca-Cola, nothing like a Coke.
Now, all you do, boys and girls, is just fill your cereal bowl with delicious Kellogg's Sugar Frosted Flakes. And then you just pour on a little milk or cream. And kids, that's all there is to it.
I, Dwight D. Eisenhower, do solemnly swear.
America was drinking Coca-Cola. Children ate Frosted Flake cereal. Dwight D. Eisenhower was spending his first year in the White House, and Percy Faith's Moulin Rouge was #1 on the pop chart.
Looking back, it was a simpler time. But spreading information during a time of need wasn't easy, and residents of Vicksburg, Mississippi found that out firsthand.
One of several tornadoes slashing their way across the South strikes historic Vicksburg, Mississippi. Vicksburg has been proclaimed a major disaster area, and federal aid is being rushed.
This is Tornado Talk, December Disaster, a historical review of what happened on December 5th, 1953 in Mississippi. At 5:31 p.m., a large tornado touched down just west of the Mississippi River in eastern Madison Parish. 4 minutes later, it had torn through downtown Vicksburg, killing 38 and injuring 270. 1,200 people were homeless.
Chad Entremont is the Science and Operations Officer at the National Weather Service in Jackson, Mississippi. He recalls the atmosphere setup that produced a series of tornadoes on a Saturday afternoon on the 5th day of December.
The conditions that day were fairly typical of what we kind of get in this region when there is severe weather. Oftentimes in the cooler months, cool season, it's hard to distinguish between if it's a tornadic environment or just severe weather. You know, that's what people would say. It does feel like tornadic weather, but their description of how the weather was beforehand from accounts, or even looking at some of the weather charts that we do have, it was a very typical setup for severe weather, beginning part of the winter down here in the South. The temperatures were in the 50s and maybe in some of the area in the 40s. So it was kind of cool because there was a really strong boundary separating the really warm, humid, unstable air to the south and south of the warm front. What happened is there was a really powerful disturbance coming out of the mountains, and the way it was oriented, it really helped to pull that front northward as a warm front and really push north, really humid air for early December. A lot of times meteorologists, we talk about the dew point. I think earlier in that day it started off in the 40s, so it was very cool, as I mentioned. But once the warm front lifted north, the dew points easily got into the middle and upper 60s. Now that's substantially high for the month of December. It wasn't overly warm. Temperatures were, lower 70s, maybe even middle 70s in a few locations. But you don't really need a whole lot of really warm temperatures. The key, it was very humid. The dew point got really warm. The wind shifted out, from the east, and it turned around and became out of the southeast and south. And with that strong disturbance kind of lifting out of the Rockies and across the plains, it really helped to develop a nice surface low that helped pull that warm front northward during the day and then lift just to the northwest of our region. And that just kind of set the stage for the organization of thunderstorms, and ultimately the ingredients all came together. Strong wind shear. We don't have an upper air sounding to get a really good gauge of how unstable the air was. You have a lot of wind energy, and you had at least sufficient instability developing. And again, it doesn't take all that much when you have high dew points that time of year.
While it was warmer than normal, the last thing anyone in Vicksburg had on their mind was preparing for a tornado. There was Christmas shopping to be done. Residents would line the streets for an afternoon parade. There was also a charity football game scheduled as a benefit for Jet High School School's Leo Puckett. He was a football player who became paralyzed after suffering a spinal injury in a game. The event that night would never happen.
Officials at the U.S. Weather Bureau issued a statement around 1:30 in the afternoon, alerting the public that tornado-producing conditions would exist. By 4 in the afternoon, the first tornado touched down north of Ruston, Louisiana, eventually hitting the town of Spearsville.
Even though tornadoes can occur anytime during the year, most wouldn't have expected in early December. But due to an urban legend, many believed a tornado would never hit their town. Marie Renaud had lived in Vicksburg almost her entire life.
They had always said that Vicksburg would never have a tornado because of the river, but we did.
Chad Entremont at the National Weather Service says myths like that one didn't die in the 1950s. They are alive and well today.
Really, those falsehoods continue to this day ever since I got in the Weather Service. I've worked in places that have fairly large rivers, and people always said, I live by the river, I'm going to be protected from any big tornado, or any tornado in general. And it seems like it doesn't take very long that there's some impactful tornado to across the river and wipe away that falsehood.
That afternoon in 1953, the tornado survived its trip across the river. Just southwest of downtown, it roared through the Vicksburg Railroad, hitting the warehouse company and other businesses. Rosa Coleman can vividly remember the weather conditions as the tornado approached.
It was raining, and then it would stop. And the wind came over our house so strong, but it didn't damage the house. But it was, off and on. The sun would shine, then it would start raining real hard, and then it would stop, and then the wind would blow. But it was a very dramatic time of my life.
Patsy Jo Clark, a Vicksburg resident, was staying with her grandparents when they heard the twisters' howling winds.
Grandma kept saying, close the window, close the window. So I got up to close the window at the foot of an iron bedstead, and when I reached up to get it, it just happened. I mean, it sounded like a train was going to come through the house, and it just blew me back on the bed, but I wasn't hurt because it's a feather bed. I thank God for that, and neighbors came and got me out in a couple of minutes, and then I realized that the chimney had fallen on my grandmother, and she was hurt, but they got her out and got her to the hospital. And my grandfather wasn't hurt, and he got out and was walking with that. He had a big old flashlight, and you didn't have flashlights and lights and things then like you do now, and you just don't realize how dark. It was pitch black. It was pouring down rain, but people were getting out and trying to save others. Everybody was willing to help and volunteer and get people out. We survived it.
Buford Evans says time hasn't erased how clearly he can picture what happened on that December day.
Well, for us, the day was just pretty much a normal day. That afternoon, my family and I, my dad, my mom, and my brother and sister all went to a place called Joe Wing Sing's Grocery, a little Chinese grocery right up the street from where we lived. We lived on Farmer Street at the time, and the grocery store was at the corner of Farmer Street and Openwood, which is now Martin Luther King Boulevard or Street or whatever they call it. And we were there, and my dad went out to throw a cigarette out the front door, and he threw the cigarette out, and he came back and he said, everybody get down because here comes a tornado. Well, he grabbed us three kids and threw us on the floor and covered us with a trench coat, and it was between one of these old meat refrigerator things with a glass front that you could look through and pick out what you wanted, and the store, nowadays we'd call it a checkout counter, but it was just a counter, and he covered us. My mother went up to see what it was because she was nosy, and the tornado came through about that time, and there was a plate glass window in the front that she was consumed by. It just came down on top of her. And back in those days, cigarette cases were beveled glass and hand done, and it was, nowadays it would be a work of art, but then it was just a cigarette case, and she was under that. The tornado itself came in the blink of an eye. There was no noise, no sound, and all we could see was sky. Everybody was milling around trying to find what was going on. We dug my mom out, got her to the car. We were digging other folks out. They told me that there was one lady who died in that, but we didn't stay around to do anything else. My dad got us, and we all got in the car. We had just gotten new seat covers on the old Chevrolet, and Dad said, "Lean back, honey." She said, "No, I'll get blood on the seat covers." So she set forward. We went up the wrong way on Monroe Street where the old Mercy Hospital was. It's now the back of Crawford Street United Methodist Church. And we went up there and got her in, and they took us upstairs. And I can remember looking out over the city of Vicksburg north, and it was like watching Gone with the Wind when Atlanta burned. There was fires everywhere, and that's the memory in my mind.
As the tornado left behind damage, everyone knew someone who had been affected. Marie Renaud was no different.
My husband's father was trapped in the Mississippi Hardware Company, which was right down the street on the corner of Washington and South Street. And I think he was not rescued until about 8:30 or so that night. I don't recall ever being afraid of storms before the tornado. Changed drastically after that.
Ollie Sykes and her boyfriend had planned a Saturday night out on the town.
I was a student nurse at Lutheran Hospital School of Nursing, and the hospital is located on Monroe Street. The nursing home backs up from Cherry Street almost to Monroe. I was taking a shower, getting ready to go on a date with my boyfriend, and someone came in the back door of the nursing home and said, "Everyone report to the hospital immediately." The lights all went out. It was dark as it could be. And we all started running down the little alley, and then someone from the hospital screamed out, or from there, told us to go back and put our uniforms on. So we went back and dressed in uniform, and when we got to the hospital, Dr. Perks, W.K. Perks, was already triaging everyone that was injured. And he sent different students to different areas and gave them a responsibility. And I remember so clearly that we had 6 young people with acute polio, and they were in an iron lung. All the electricity was gone. By the time we got to the 4th floor where they were, men had come in to the emergency room and brought injured and everything, and there were people lined up to keep those kids alive. And we had coal oil lamps, we had a few candles, and they operated. Dr. Willard H. Parsons operated all night long. Dr. Moore fixed a lot of broken bones that night, and it was the most awesome thing for me to see as a very young student nurse, how these gentlemen who were doctors could be so calm and do so much for those that were injured that was brought in.
One of the children at the Sanger Theater was Stephanie Mitchell. Her 10th birthday was on December 5th, 1953. Since her sister also had a birthday in the coming days, their parents invited the girls and their friends to see the movie Botany Bay. After dropping off the kids, her father George returned home, while Lillian, her mother, who was 7 months pregnant, would stay at the theater.
The Sanger was located directly in the Twister's path. As a tornado got closer, power went out, then a wall collapsed, causing the ceiling and screen to come crashing down. 5 children, all under 10 years old, died inside the theater. The Mitchell family got out alive, and Lillian, she was taken to the maternity ward where just 3 days later, she gave birth to a baby girl.
It is hard to imagine how those inside the theater wouldn't have known a damaging tornado was headed their way. Chris Entremont at the National Weather Service says the technology in 1953 was nowhere near what it is in the modern era.
We live in the world now where we always have information right in front of us, and everything is, so it's kind of hard for us to gauge just 40, 50, 70 years ago how much different communication was, and just to people talk about, well, we didn't expect anything coming. So much different than we're used to now, but at that time, the weather forecasting and especially the forecasting of severe weather and tornadoes was at its infancy. Nowadays, people are very familiar with tornado watches and tornado warnings. Back then, tornado warnings didn't exist. Now, you had some bulletin that was essentially like a tornado watch. That's something we're more familiar with today. That's all they had.
Radio was a major source for news and information that evening. Edmund Cummins was a senior at Carr Central High School and on the air at WQBC as an announcer. By 8 p.m., emergency power had been restored to their equipment, and they stayed on the air day and night for the next 4 days to keep people up to date.
Buford Evans and his family were listening.
There's a lot of places in Vicksburg that were destroyed. My uncle and aunt, my uncle worked for the Corps of Engineers, and he and my aunt, who was barely 5 feet tall, went and moved radios, portable radios, if you could call them portable then, because they probably weighed as much as she did, to help. Everybody pulled together. I heard a lot of horror stories of different things, different people around town hurting. One of the people who lived down the road from when we first moved to Vicksburg had a pair of twins, and one of the twins was killed in the old Sanger Theater. And they tell me that exactly 1 year to the day, the other twin that survived woke up in a nightmare. Many, many horror stories through that. For the longest time after that, my dad would grab us. If the sky turned dark, he'd grab us and we'd go to the basement of the post office, which was a pretty safe place. And what that did for me was make me hate to run away and hide,
If you were to estimate the damage in today's economy, it would equate to about $200 million in losses. Chris Entremont at the National Weather Service says the tornado was classified as an F5, the worst. He retraced the tornado's beginning and end.
Initially we have it starting, based on all the accounts, it's just kind of southwest of the city of Vicksburg on the other side of the river in a little community called Delta. And that's really where the only population was. And if you can follow further back, looking at the map and following the track that we do have, essentially this thing, it could have been on the ground and started much further back. But it went through such a rural area. Who knows exactly, how much of the track was missed. But essentially when it started impacting people was around the community of Delta in Louisiana, just west or southwest of Vicksburg on the western side of the Mississippi River. So it crossed the Mississippi River and basically made a direct hit into downtown Vicksburg and lifted, and it was kind of moving in a northeast fashion and lifted right through downtown. It lifted before it crossed Highway 61. So it was really essentially kind of concentrated right around the city there. Overall, the path, based on the documentation, is 7 miles long, and it was a pretty wide tornado, 500 yards. And back then, the majority of the buildings were well-built brick structures, and when you have a really powerful tornado go through that, and you can just look at some of the pictures we had found and have posted. It really caused significant damage to the heart of a big town there. So it took many years to recover and build those things back up. And it's a life-changing event. Anytime you lose one life, that's too many. And unfortunately, during that tornado, there were 38 fatalities. It being early December before the holidays, very impactful for that region.
Agencies and organizations from across the region came to Vicksburg to help. Ollie Sykes says the response was enormous.
When the National Guard came in, there were about 200 of them. We had about 60 assigned to our hospital. And they set up a field hospital outside by the emergency room. And while the next morning, all we had to serve our patients, and there were a lot of them laying on the floor, in the hallways, everywhere, was cold cereal. And that's what we served, cold cereal with some milk until it all ran out.
Assistance was also needed for those affected by another tornado nearby that would do F3 damage.
The Beekman and Montrose tornado, that was an F3. That one did impact some parishes and a county in our service area. Essentially, it's an area that's just to the northwest of Vicksburg, and that one occurred a little bit before the Vicksburg tornado. The Beekman Montrose tornado, it looks like it started around 5 o'clock in the afternoon, when the Vicksburg one started at 5:30. This is pretty typical with big tornado events, that you have multiple storms that produce big tornadoes, and they can be very close in proximity and timing. And that seemed to be the case, that particular day.
David Dabney was 11 years old on the day that Vicksburg took a direct hit from a tornado. He and his family wanted to do anything they could to help storm victims. Turns out Western Union didn't have enough workers to deliver telegrams. David said he plastered a Western Union sign on his bicycle and spent 3 days taking between 50 and 100 telegrams to those in the devastated areas.
Ollie Sykes is thankful she chose the line of work she did because it allowed her to provide help during one of the most critical times of her life.
I didn't see my husband or my boyfriend for about 4 days because we were working 14-hour shifts, and so was he. And he had so many stories to tell because he was down there digging those kids out, for one thing. But I was so impressed with the profession that I had chosen and how well it worked.
Those who witnessed the tornado say they'll never, ever forget it. One woman who nearly lost her life was forever changed, but grateful to be alive.
And she was Buford Evans' mother.
The doctor said that she was the worst hurt one in a tornado that survived. She was crushed, and in the period of the next 25 years, she had 38 surgeries. And her face was distorted, but she didn't let that bother and didn't let her slow her down.
And for those who were just children at the time, it feels like December 5th, 1953 was just yesterday. Eddie Guy Shears was 9 years old that day.
It was an experience that you can't describe. It's you see lumber going through the air, you see treetops going through the air, and I remember it got so dark it looked like night.
We would like to thank the National Weather Service in Jackson, Mississippi for providing us these personal accounts that were gathered in 2013 for the 60th anniversary of the Vicksburg tornado. Next on Tornado Talk, the greatest gift anyone can provide in a time of tragedy is love and support. The story of one organization who turns the thrill of tornado chasing into aid and recovery for victims in their path. Plus, the 2015 Rowlett and Garland, Texas late December twisters. Texas tornadoes on episode 27 of Tornado Talk.